Well, it'll be for a second, but then, and I'll retweet so everyone knows. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. No, I'm not hearing anything, but it still has the coming up screen on it. So that's true. Oh, yay! I hear myself.
Yay!
Yes, and we do, in fact, have chat here telling us that they can hear us. So that's fantastic. Yay, yay. Okay, I'm going to retweet really, really quickly so that people know that we are back on. Thank you for actually, if you don't mind, Adam or someone else in chat, like Corey, can you retweet and let people know that we're here? Awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to do sponsors, but I'm going to do them faster. All right, so I'm so excited to be here with Banana, and we're going to be talking about Jiangshi or Jiangshi, depending on how you pronounce it and where you're pronouncing it from. But that's what I'm calling it. I'm sticking with that. Which is a new game that's in Kickstarter right now. I think there's like a week left of the Kickstarter. I think a week.
I think it's like 9 days.
9 days?
8
wow.
days.
Okay. A little more than a week left on the Kickstarter, and I'm so excited to talk about it. It's just, I'm just nerding out completely over it, and I love it so much. So we're going to talk a lot about that. It's Banana Chen and Sen Fun Lim, who are both the creators. So shout out to him. And I want to really quick recognize our sponsors. So DM Emporium is the one-stop shop for all your gaming needs. So if you're like, I want a beer stein, or I want like a drinking horn, or I want to wear a tunic to my gaming table, or I just want super awesome dice, that's the place to go. DM Emporium. And also, it is run by one of our cast members who's like, such a sweet, wonderful person and deserves it. So I think FWRD is the code. And if you enter that, you'll get 10% off, and we'll get a little bit of that moolah to help us with our growing channel. And so Nerdware is our other sponsor, and they have so many cool t-shirts. And they're D&D related, TTRPG related, LGBTQIA related, which is my favorite part. They've got this line of t-shirts that are like 2 D20s with like multiple identity flags. So like I found a non-binary pansexual one. So excited. So they're cool, but they have tons of other nerdy stuff too. So head on over there, check out their t-shirts. Friends is the code that you put in there, and you get 10% off, and we get a little. So if you want to support the channel and also have cool t-shirts, that's the way to do it. So let's get the show on the road. And Banana, if you want to take a second and just tell us a little bit about who you are, and then maybe tell us about your game, and then we'll dive in.
Sounds good. I am also very excited for these shirts. Like the more you talk about them, I'm just like, oh my gosh,
right?
Need to write that code down. Need to remember that. So thanks for having me on. My name is Banana Chan. I am the owner and co-founder of a small box board game and RPG publishing company called Game and a Curry. I am also the co-designer for Jiangshi Blend the Banquet Hall, but on the side, I do like a lot of design stuff for various projects that are outside of my company. And so I designed this game with Sen Fun Lim, and together we made this thing, and it's very exciting.
So tell us a little bit about the game and what it's about, and kind of what inspired you to do this particular kind of game.
Yeah, absolutely. The game is it's a TTRPG, a tabletop role-playing game, where players take on the roles of a Chinese immigrant family trying to run a restaurant and trying to basically survive in this 1920s Chinatown. So it could be like set in the US, or it could be set in Canada, depending on like which setting you want to play in. So in the daytime, you're just like faced with oppression and like the stresses of running this restaurant. Meanwhile, at night, Jiangshi, the hopping vampires, come out, and they basically, the family has to basically defend themselves against these paranormal entities.
I love it. And I love that these are all together in the same mix. That like dealing with making a living in a difficult environment, and racism, and creatures that want to suck your life force away. They're all kind of part of your day.
Yeah.
They're all together. Your day and your night. So awesome. So like when did this first come to your mind? Like what inspired you to tell this particular, or facilitate really other people telling this particular story?
So I think it sort of started when Sen and I, we met and, we started chatting and we were like, oh, we really want to make a game that's about our own culture and our own identity. And, sometimes we see Asian themes portrayed in games that are not necessarily by Asian people. And so we were like, why don't we try and do something and, give it a shot and have our own take of like, what we think, uh, our identity looks like. And so we started brainstorming. We were just like going back and forth on like, all these ideas. We actually have like this living Google document, which is just like a whole bunch of it's mostly nonsense to like anyone that's not us. And it's just
I have a
like,
few of those.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's just like all these ideas just like mashed together. And so eventually we're just like, this would be a great theme, like, running a restaurant, because that's like something that's very family oriented. It's very like much in the culture. Like that's something that both Sen and I, like, growing up, that's something that we've seen a lot of. Going to a restaurant with our family, eating around a table, especially during like banquets and stuff. So we were like, why don't we talk about that? Why don't we like, make a game around that? And also, why don't we make it a little more interesting and add some junction mechanics?
It's a good combination, I think.
Yeah.
You feed yourself during the day and then you are fed on during the night.
Exactly, yeah. So the Jiangshi in of itself, they like they're sort of like this metaphor for all the oppression that Chinese Americans, Chinese Canadians have faced back then. Obviously, we're still going through like different things now, but back then because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, especially in the U.S., things were just like a little rocky. And also in Canada, like after the railroads were built, like, there was a lot of stuff there that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know that a lot of the immigration policy that we have now actually came from that Chinese Exclusion Act. It was originally anti-Chinese American. And this whole legacy. And now I'm thinking about this like hopping corpse that keeps coming back from the dead and won't go away. Like this whole legacy of racism and anti-immigration sentiment. And I mean, it is like a creature from beyond the grave that will not leave us alone. So it as a metaphor, it just seems very powerful to me. Um, and
Yeah.
I was struck too by, I mean, first of all, just the basic like, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have a game about Asian culture actually written by people whose culture it is? Especially right now with like all sorts of like, issues about like Orientalist settings being reprinted and profits made off of them. And if I had to pick a culture that I think was the most exploited and misrepresented in gaming culture, I think East Asian culture and maybe specifically Chinese or Japanese culture would be the two that I would pick. That it's just it has not been represented in an accurate way from what I can tell.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine what that's like and what it feels like to be able to have your voice heard about like, no, but this is actually who I am and how I experience my culture.
Yeah. It's been a very strange and cathartic experience for sure. I think this entire journey has been it's been interesting to say the least because when we first started, we were like, okay, we're just gonna, write about what we know. And then we realized that there was a lot of stuff we didn't know. And that's why we hired on so many consultants as well. We have a consultant for sensitivity reading just across the board because sometimes when I'm writing, I do get a little salty and I need someone to like be like, hey, maybe you should use these words instead.
I want to see the salty version.
It's like I think it's like version 1 or version 2. We're at like version 5 or 6 right now. But yeah, it was because actually one of the games that I played a while back was this game that used an Asian theme, but it wasn't written by an Asian person. And the one of the ways that you do character creation is by looking through a Chinese menu and picking your name from a Chinese. So that was like what uh, sort of gave me that push into like being, hey, you should really do this thing.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was
Yeah.
also thinking as you were talking too about how taking a step back and trying to think about playing a game like this through a different cultural lens brings different elements. Like you almost never see intergenerational stories in board games or in TTRPGs or really in video games. And I was, I watched one of your actual plays and was looking at like how like there's multiple generations represented. I've I've never seen an adventuring party like that. Like, there are just such different kinds of stories that can be told when you're allowed to start from a different place, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I usually tend towards games that have less combat and more like weird sort of storytelling elements to them. So that's sort of like a little bit of a framework for where we started with writing Jiangshi. I've played games before where it was like a lot of family stuff. So Marinero was actually one of the inspirations for this game as well.
That makes sense.
Um, so this is yeah. So I believe Marinera came out probably 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. But yeah, I played that at a convention, at a mini convention, and it was just such a great game, and it was so much fun. Just like having all the silly family dynamics, and you're making food together. So that was definitely something that inspired this.
Yeah. Just the centrality of food to the way that we bond to each other and to
Mhm.
our identity as people.
Yeah, yeah. I think that food it plays a huge part in different cultures. Like it's such a big centerpiece. So yeah, I think that when we're talking about food, it doesn't just like it's not just like a thing that's there. It's also like this thing that brings back memories. And like anytime we're playing with like other people, Sen and I, anytime we're playing with like other people, it's like we love hearing how the players are just like, oh, this reminds me of like, that time my grandma made like these noodles, or like, when I go out for kanji in the morning with my parents, stories like that. So it really touches on a lot of personal things, I think.
Yes, I kind of got chills when we were talking about that. Actually, it's so sweet. It's like
Oh,
so many of our like fondest memories are smell and taste.
yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember from the actual play I saw there was this moment where they were deciding kind of what the menu was. And it was like, well, we'll have a couple kinds of steak, and then we'll kind of have the kind of food that we can sell here, but then we're also going to have the kind of food that we really want to eat.
Yeah.
And I mean, even there, I was like, oh, wow, like you're really seeing assimilation, even at the basic level of like supply chain and menu.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And also in like the game itself, you have different facets and skills on the player sheet. So there is I believe I always mix the two up. So there's a skill of the skill is passing. So you can pass in like a if you're like talking to another white NPC.
Mhm.
But there's another facet that's called assimilated. So usually these facets and skills are these specific ones are for like
Mhm.
the youngest character, because they're so new to this environment. They're like sort of struggling with like their own family dynamics, and they're like this all the stuff that's happening in like the exterior world. So just like it was a very personal thing, just like adding that in for me, just because like I grew up in Hong Kong, but at an early age I moved to Canada. um I went to boarding school in Canada for like 4 years. And so it was sort of like this weird like shock, like this culture shock. And it was definitely and I think like Sen feels the same way as well. Like when we're talking about like feeling assimilated and feeling like, an outsider trying to fit in like so hard, and just like rejecting all of our, ourselves.
Mhm.
It's like it's definitely shown in the game as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Like my price for entry into this culture is let me just take a little piece of myself and hand it over to you and let you consume
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, that
yeah.
makes sense. And I mean, the idea of the grind of it too, of like that's woven into daily choices and ongoing choices, and not just like a I had this one crucial moment where I had to make this decision about how I was going to, but like every day I'm making these choices about
Yeah.
how much of myself to give and how much of myself to hold back and who I am. And yeah, and I love that the game mechanics reflect that. They're not just like peak moment to peak moment to peak moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the game itself, we we have a hard mode and we have an easier mode.
I did
So
not know that, and I know I will be playing on easy mode.
I mean, they're both interesting in their own ways. So the easy mode is that you don't integrate the Hmong cards. So the Hmong are
Mm.
nightmares. So in Cantonese, it's Hmong. But basically, they're either good dreams or bad dreams. And if you have bad dreams, then they cover up slots on your character sheet so that you can't use your skills, your facets, your items, what have you. And it sort of speeds up the process when you're like taking on damage, because damage also covers up these items and facets and everything else. But easy mode is sort of like just not using the Mon cards in general, but like when you're using them, the cool thing is that you get to talk about the dreams, and like when you talk about the dreams with
Yes.
like other players or other player characters, you can roll a die and see if that nightmare gets taken away. So you're relieving yourself of like the stress. So
I'm sorry. I love it. I mean, I'm a psychologist. Of course, I'm going to be all about the dreams. But I love
Seth's
that.
also a psychologist, so
So I get it. I love that. But and I also just love the idea like you don't get to be, first of all, that there's psychic damage in a very literal way, not in
Mhm.
a Dungeons and Dragons way. But like that and that doesn't leave you even when you're unconscious. It's
Mhm.
not like a reprieve from
Right.
any of it. So, okay, never mind. I'll play in hard mode. I'll play in psychologically complex mode when I finally get to play it. Yeah, and it just so another part of this too, because on the one hand, there's that experience that many people I've seen already are having of like, look, my culture and my identity is out there and being accurately portrayed and lovingly and passionately portrayed. And I'm so like, I love your Kickstarter just for seeing like, and then we researched this thing and we learned this new thing. It's
Oh,
awesome.
thank
Like,
you.
it's the most fun Kickstarter site for anyone who's slightly nerdy. It's
Thank
fantastic.
you.
And there's that side of like, oh my gosh, this loving attention and personal experience being brought in. And then on the other hand, like I'm sure a large portion of your audience is going to be people who not only don't have a Chinese American or Canadian experience, but not an Asian American or Canadian experience. And some of our
Mhm.
ancestors might have been involved in some of the other side of that equation.
Mhm.
So I I'm so curious about, because it's such a topic of conversation in the TTRPG world of like portraying racism and how you do that. And
Mhm.
and how you do that as someone who maybe doesn't have as intimate a knowledge of what that looks like. And I heard there were instructions in the game
Yes,
about that, which is
there
mind-blowingly cool.
Yeah, so there are definitely instructions. So this is the portion that James Mendez Hodes actually sort of helped me write because I was getting a little salty. We talked a bit about like we went back and forth, obviously, like on what what would make sense, and how to be gentle with yourself when you do make mistakes, because mistakes are going to happen around the table. And we have the usual safety mechanics of the X card, the lines and veils, the open door policy, but we also wanted to talk about like what you can do to sort of play a Chinese character at the table. And a lot of it has to do with like avoiding stereotypes and avoiding accents, and sort of focusing more on what the character is like. So the placemat, with all the facets and skills and everything, sort of are also these role playing assets that you can like latch onto, right? So instead of thinking, oh, this person is, uh, really into martial arts, maybe instead of that, focus on like the other things that your character also has. So maybe they do have a martial arts skill, but because you're working in a restaurant and because it's like your day to day, you're not going to have a lot of time to focus on that. You're probably not very good at it, even though you like doing it.
You're a little
So it's more of a
busy.
hobby. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, we talked to like a few restaurant owners as well, and they were all just like, "Yeah, you wouldn't have time to do any of that." So yeah, it's it sort of tracks.
That makes
So
sense.
yeah, so like the character sheet itself, not only does it have like this one skill, maybe you have like this other skill, like maybe you're also a poet, or maybe you're also a musician, or maybe you're also like, um, you're also good at like negotiating or gambling, or whatever else you have on your sheet. So it's sort of like adding more three dimensionality to your character
Mhm.
instead of focusing so much on like one thing that your character might be interested in.
Yeah.
And also the hopes and dreams. Sorry, I just
No, no,
like
no, I
got
wanna hear
really
it, I wanna
excited
hear
because
it.
I
No,
just
no, no, no,
realized,
please.
uh, like the hopes and dreams on your character sheet is like the last thing that gets covered up. So once you cover that up, you turn into a Jiangshi. Um, but the hopes and dreams is like the last thing to go, because that's what you're latching onto, and it could be different between your character from like another person's character. Uh, you know, just so that it has that sort of like push and pull effect, where it's like you are maybe you're like the child in the family and you want to become like a poet, and then your family is like, no, you have to take on this family restaurant. So that's sort of like integrated into the character as well, so it sort of adds more realism to what
Yes.
they're like.
I was like, your hopes and dreams are the last to go before you become the living dead. That was yes, poetic, in fact. Absolutely. And I mean, I love that that's there, and I think it's like a template for really good character creation in general. And also, and I mean, like I said, I love salty. But also maybe like part of me would be like, why does this have to be here? This is wonderful, and I'm so excited that it's here, and I'm also so annoyed that it has to be here. Why do we have to tell people if play three-dimensional characters, y'all, not
Yeah.
stereotypes? But
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I mean,
our experiences also, it's
yeah.
uh like when we're playing with strangers at a convention, it's surprisingly, or at least I found that it's been a little rocky. Like I've experienced like people playing like, not the best way, where they're using accents, and so we just wanted to like add all this stuff in, just to make sure people understand.
Yeah.
And we also have a section on like how to be a racist antagonizing without harming the table.
Yes.
So it sort of like makes people recognize like what microaggressions look like as well. Because sometimes I think that like, and obviously not everyone is going to not know what they look like, but it sort of like shines a light onto like, what is harmful and what
Mhm.
is racist. Because like even for me at least, like sometimes I won't even see it, like I'm just like not, or at least I don't want to confront it like in real life when something like that does happen. So it's good to like sort of reassess things that way.
Oh, and the feeling of like, then you look back on it afterwards. And is that
Right.
and even have that self-doubt of is that what happened there? I'm
Yeah.
not yeah, absolutely. And I think that's I mean, there's so much being taught in this game in the service of also having a really good time, because it's fun as heck. But there's so much being taught in this game in the sense that like racism is not usually a big dramatic event. It's those
Mhm.
little tiny things over and over and over again. And it's a grind similar to the grind of running a restaurant the
Right.
way that you're describing it, yeah. And I'm also though struck by how much you're exposing yourself to in order to bring this to life, by going to these conventions and running these tables and like that sounds like a very vulnerable place to be in order to make this happen.
Yeah, surprisingly, a lot of the people that we played with have been incredible. Like everyone's been very nice and very gentle and very open to this experience. And I think that's great. Like no one's been mean at the table, so that's really I think that sort of makes me a little more hopeful for like how people are going to play this in real life without
Yes.
us.
Yeah, yes. Because someday it's going to be out there on its own, like a baby
Yeah.
who's grown into an adult and doing its own thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, you put so much care and effort into really trying to make something that can live on its own, and
Mhm.
then can go out there and be meaningful on both of those levels, meaningful on helping people feel represented and seen, heard, and understood, and also building empathy and understanding and fun with zombies
Yeah, exactly.
at the same time. Do you want to say a little bit more about the Jiangshi? Because I think like
Oh.
the hopping zombies. Let's describe those a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So there's like not really one set mythology behind them. There's like several different stories behind like what they are. But one of my favorites is that, and this dabbles into like Taoist sorcery as well and esoteric Taoism in general, where a Taoist priest was trying to carry some bodies from point A to point B. So they were like, I gotta lug all these bodies over because they have to go back to their or they have to go to their eventual burial site. So they were trying to like move these bodies over. So what they did was they enchanted the bodies with these paper talismans, these like faux paper talismans, and they stuck them onto their foreheads, and they started hopping. So they would follow the priest, and they would like go to their burial site. Unfortunately, as many weird new technologies sometimes mess up.
That
Like
never happens. What?
yeah, exactly. It was like a gust of wind or like some like a storm or something like blew these paper talismans off their heads, and that's how we have like the Jiangshi in this game as well. So
I love that that comes from, well, this is a pain in the butt kind of task. How can I make this a little easier on myself? Oh, shoot, that didn't work.
oops.
Oopsies. Sorry about that, future generations.
Yeah.
Fantastic is an
Yeah.
origin story.
Yeah, and so we discovered that there's like a lot of these like Chinese myths that are sort of like that, where they're just like sort of goofy and like even like the whole process of the underworld itself, DU, it's uh it's a lot of like paperwork. Like we realize that a lot of the stuff that goes into like Chinese mythology is just like filing paperwork.
I love it so much.
Yeah.
That's actually a theme in my homebrew setting too. So
Oh,
like, I'm feeling it so hard. Yes. Now I have to study that and see because someone did it better than me already. That's so awesome. And also relevant to trying to run a restaurant.
yeah,
There's a
exactly.
lot of paperwork involved in that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, especially back then because that was like one of the few things that Chinese Americans could do. So running a restaurant or having a laundromat, those were like the few jobs that they could do. So yeah, it's surprisingly like a lot of parallels.
Yeah. There's a little bit of an underworld flavor there in
Yeah,
it too.
yeah.
I was thinking about also kind of the timeliness of this game. And just I don't know, I'm trying to find a way of putting it well without like name dropping my family, but I'm gonna just name drop my family. My because my sister-in-law is Chinese American, and obviously I'm not as sensitized to this stuff. I have the privilege of not being as sensitized to this stuff, but she is like, hey, I just want to point out how that just got worded in the news and how that impacts me. And hey, I want you to know that I'm afraid when I hear these things. Sorry, I'm like choking up while I'm saying that. Sorry. I love you, sister-in-law. You're never watching this because you don't play TTRPGs, but I love you anyway. Um, and and then to see this game come out, like that's here is our place in American history.
Mhm.
And also like we want to grapple with and pay attention to microaggressions and to racism and how that impacts everyday life. I don't know how long ago you started this and whether you anticipated that it would be in a time like this one.
So we worked. I think we started working on this in 2018, and we were going to we got the basically we finished deciding that we were going to co-publish this with What in Games, I think sometime in 2019, and we were just like, okay, we have this date set, and then the pandemic happened. So it was very unplanned.
You didn't plan the pendant for the you're sure you weren't just like wasn't in your calendar book.
Oh, just another thing on the calendar.
Oh my goodness. And I just it feels good to see this coming out into the TTRPG sphere at this time, both in terms of like the broader, at least United States community and discourse. I won't speak for Canada. And also like in terms of what's going on with cultural appropriation narratives and talking about, Dungeons and Dragons and Orientalism and all of that kind of pushback. And to have something that's coming out saying, but here's a way to do it right.
I hope
Yeah.
so. I don't think that's perfect. And obviously, all of us working on this game, we're not like perfect people.
No,
I
I'm disappointed. I'm so disappointed.
We're trying. We're not quite there yet.
Back to me when you get.
But yeah, like it's strange because there's so few products and pieces of media that are by Asian Americans that are about Asian Americans. And so sometimes we do run into these issues where it's like, you know, we we do get like feedback where it's like, are you addressing this thing? Are you not addressing this thing? And it does sort of uh, it does make us remember that we're not like a monolith,
Mhm.
and it's definitely not just one one experience, and we're trying not to make it like we're trying to make it as like varied and nuanced as possible, but of course it's not going to be like a perfect game. And like the long-term goal for this, the short-term goal is for us to publish this game and like sell copies and whatever, but the long-term goal is that it sort of inspires more Asian creators to make more stuff and like actually get more content that's got Asian themes, written by Asian creators. So hopefully in the long run, like I don't know, this is our like 10-year plan. But, if we're not gonna do it, then hopefully other people will.
Yeah. But you reflect that spirit so much in the way that you're approaching this project from what I've seen. Like just in looking at the ways that you say, oh, we represented something this way, but then someone pointed this out. And we're really concerned we're going to change this and we're getting feedback on this and we're interested in this and using so many consultants and not going out there saying, I got this. I know this stuff. I'm the expert. I don't want to hear any other voices. Like you're very much not like that sort of singular auteur sort of idea. Like you're very much taking in feedback.
Yeah,
And that's so, like I said, look at the Kickstarter. It's on his Kickstarter. There's that ongoing dialogue, which to me seems to be part of doing it right. Right.
I
And
hope
it's,
so. Yeah,
yeah. And I mean,
we're trying.
yeah. And I mean, even when you were talking about like the X, N, and O system, and I wish so much that this spirit was there all the time. But like, if you do something wrong, if you mess up and someone X cards you, the unhelpful response is, "Oh no, I'm a terrible person. I've misrepresented someone else's culture, or I've misrepresented my own culture. My mom would be so mad at me." Or like there's like that shame spiral that can happen, as opposed to being out there and doing your best, and then taking when someone X cards you, and preferably it wouldn't get to an X card point, but metaphorically, when someone's like, "Oops, you did wrong," going like, "Oh, cool, thank you for letting me know. Like now I'm learning a new
Yeah.
thing."
Right,
Right.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, a lot of the things that we've written in like I guess like that section as well, like the playing the Chinese character section. We also touch upon like, not trying too hard, like just try to, you know, be what you think of like a character in that position would do. Like, don't try to I guess like don't try to integrate too much of like stuff that you don't know, but try to integrate the stuff that you do know into the character.
Yeah. Yeah. And eventually just lean back and be a person.
Exactly.
Makes sense. That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. And I find that like being able to sort of turn off that noise, and it's obviously it's not the same kind of parallel, but when I play a queer character, or even when I play a character with like no identification about sexual orientation, and I have the sense of no, I must represent queer people and I must do it right. And if I say something wrong or I do something wrong, then like, oh no, like I've failed. And I think for any marginalized experience, there's also that pressure as
Yeah.
well. And
Yeah.
also the ability to like create a character, think about this stuff, and then ultimately lean in and be a person,
Mhm. Yeah.
and be able to turn some of that off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and I was talking to like a lot of other marginalized creators as well about this sort of thing where it's like, I think that when you're creating and when you're trying too hard, you sometimes lapse back into this thinking, like this self doubt, which is like telling you, like, at least for me during this whole experience, I was just like, oh my God, am I Asian enough for this? Like, am I even Asian for this? Like, that was like Sen has, and like seriously, he's been amazing. He had to like go through a couple of my breakdowns where I'm just like, oh my God, am I like even worthy of making this product with you? And honestly, at the end of the day, like, because the experience itself is so varied, we're just doing what we can. We're listening to people, we're taking on consultants, we're asking them like what they think the right thing to do is, and we're making a thing and we're pushing forward with it.
Yes. You're making a thing with humility and passion and pushing forward with it. What's it like playing in a game as a family? That's also something that I don't see very often.
So when I GM, I usually end up having this Bob's Burgers type scenario. And it's like almost every single time, like every single time I've GM'd, it's always been like this. And I don't know if it's because of the players I play with, or if it's because of like the way I run it, but it always ends up being like this weird comedy. And like there's Josha.
I mean, that's to me, that's family life. So that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. There's
Yeah.
a bunch of laughter, and there's some demons somewhere.
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
But I mean, intergenerational narratives, and I think in terms of like the different ways that generations experience both like assimilation and work and trauma, and like to have that portrayed in one game too. It's again, like I said, to me, very rare. Um, and it would be an interesting challenge playing somebody's grandmother who's there.
Yeah. So everyone always calls dibs on the grandmother for some strange
Yeah,
reason.
of course.
I don't know, maybe because we make grandma like, a total badass. Grandma's a lot of fun to play. Um, and they also have like a lot of knowledge, so they can sort of like, you know, try to pass some of that stuff down to their child slash grandchild, but usually it doesn't always stick. So it's really interesting to see how like different players take on these different characters. But the grandparents always like the first pick,
Yes.
and then from there it's like the kid, like the child, and then the two parents are like the last set of
The ones
picked.
in the middle. Yeah,
Yeah,
the child going like, "Oh my god, grandma," would also be fun.
yeah, it's super
I could
fun.
totally see that.
Yeah.
And exploring the grind of daily life and trauma and assimilation with some laughter.
Yeah,
Makes a
yeah.
lot of sense too.
And the child surprisingly has like a lot of pressure put on them, like in general, like
Mhm.
not just from like, racism and oppression and like, just living day to day, but also from their parents because they have such high expectations of them to, have a better life than them. And even though it sounds like a nice thing, it sometimes does get a little stressful for the
Oh
child.
yeah. I have to make my parents' sacrifices worth it. I have to make up for all of these painful things that they have experienced. in my
exactly.
own life. And
Yeah,
no pressure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like taking their pain and holding it on your shoulders throughout your life.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so it has that, I mean, you've got the humor, but then there's that other piece that can sneak in as you're playing
yeah,
authentically, of yeah, like, even you might think that being the youngest generation is the easiest, but it's not necessarily. They all
yeah.
have their own challenges, for
Yeah, it's
sure.
like one of those moments where you're just like stopping and realizing, oh my gosh, like this character is going through a lot right now. And you don't realize it when you're role playing, but like when you just like stop and you're just like, oh wow, like this is happening now. Um, yeah, it does creep up.
Yeah. I mean, and you were just saying that's so true to life because you were just talking about sometimes stuff happens to me and I don't even notice when it happens. And
Yeah.
then later I'm like, hmm. So it's so interesting. Like role playing absolutely reflects that experience sometimes. And it's a good metaphor because we're out there playing roles and that's
Right.
what we're doing. So that makes sense. I would love to hear too a little bit about some of your other projects because I know like this is a unique time to be having creative projects in the TTRPG industry.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird time. So, one of the games that just came out that I was working on was Scooby Doo Betrayal at Mystery Mansion. So that's a board
Ongoing
game.
horror theme.
Ongoing horror theme, yes. So I worked on a team with that. So that's out now in stores. I also worked a little bit on Sea of Legends, which is a pirate game that uses an app. So it's got like a storytelling element where you're like on a board, and it's got a whole bunch of my friends in it, and we're all like, we're all adventure writers slash product developers, what have you. So it's very exciting for me. Um, in the more like experimental side of stuff, I guess. Um, we're trying to make games for Zoom, integrating that platform into the game itself, using Discord. I have a friend, Stephanie Noodleman. We're working on this game called Nexus, which is based off a reality TV show called The Circle. I don't know if you've seen it.
Is that the one where they don't interact, but they're only doing like social media with each other?
Yes, and
Yes.
it's
Oh my
so
gosh. No, no, that sounds amazing.
it's so good. It's so
Yes.
good. So we're working on a game based around that using Discord, and we've realized that we need to have like a Discord role playing guide, which is something that
Ooh.
yeah, it's like something you don't really think about when you're like doing it, but then suddenly we're just like, oh, we definitely need a guide to like so that people know how to role play on Discord. Um,
Oh, that's such a I hope that you release that and advertise the hell out of that when you do that because that's yes. That makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. It's It's been a weird few months just, like, working on all these projects, but yeah, and I guess, like, another project that I worked on, like, a couple of years ago or 4 years ago now, what is time? Uh, it was called, They're Onto Me, which is, like, this vlogging, solo LARP, and I've been seeing, like, people going back to it now. Like, I guess at the time when I made it, for the Golden Cobra Challenge, it was just like, "Oh, this is a cool pervasive LARP," but now it feels like people are actually playing it more, which is kinda surprising. So, yeah, that's kinda cool.
It makes sense that there's something that you can do that's really creative on your own at a time when we're all having to be creative on our own.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely, it's a it's a weird forced experience, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and you were talking before we came on about like immersiveness and how you lose immersiveness being experiencing Zoom fatigue, and how you lose that. And if can you kind of say a little bit to people listening about that because I think that was such a good point about what we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people might also experience this, but for me, when I'm playing like tabletop role playing games on this sort of platform, like Zoom specifically, or like Discord or whatever other video app, um, there is this you sort of get like tired because you're not sure like what the other person is thinking, or like really if they're paying attention to you, or if you're doing the right thing, because you're not sure if they're reacting to you, right?
Hmm.
Or if they're reacting to something else, because you're not making eye contact, you can't see their body language. And so it's sort of like this weird sort of, you have to do like extra work in order to like understand like what the other person. um, And so I think that with traditional role playing games where you're playing around the table, it's easier to see that, right? It's easier to communicate. But like with this new, you know, these newfangled ways of communicating, it's like a little harder. So I think that like a lot of creators right now are, and creators have been doing this for a while. Like, a lot of creators have been like making online role playing games that the platforms that we have accessible to everyone. And like, some people that have been doing this are Garrett Writinghouse, who coined the term live action online game. Live action, yes, LAUG is the acronym. And Jeff Dieterle did it with longtime listener, last time caller, which is like this radio call-in type game. And it's a little untimely because it's about the apocalypse, but he wrote it like, I
Or
think he wrote it like,
timely. Yeah,
yeah, or
timely,
timely.
like depending on the mood that you're in that day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he wrote it like 2 or 3 years ago, so it's just like, now is the perfect time to play this, because you don't have to look at each other, you don't have to like, be in the same room as each other. So it's definitely using this kind of platform to be that vehicle for storytelling. And then, Alice is Missing is another one that's just released
Yeah.
by Renegade and Hunters. And I think Avon Alias's game, As We Know It, is also great because it's like texting. It's all text based, like you're texting with your phone and you're in a closet. So again, they made this game uh, years before all of this happened. And, like, it's
Life
strange.
imitated art.
Yeah, exactly. It's strange too because the game They're Onto Me, that's also like about an oncoming like alien invasion, and it's like very much like about paranoia and all that. Whereas like Evan Alias's game, As We Know It, is also about something similar. It's also about like the apocalypse and like these
Yes.
these doom feelings.
Yes. I've
So
got to process it somehow. Um,
yeah,
yeah. And as you're speaking about this and we're thinking about immersive experiences, I'm also thinking about like how wonderful it's been to read the material and look at the live role plays of a game that's about getting together in a restaurant and either feeding or eating together. Like of those before times when when we would be coming together in a place and exchange, breaking bread together and all of that. And that like the core of Jiangshi is really that. It's that space of
yeah.
being together and being in contact with each other. Um, and it just that also feels timely to me in some way. Like I want to go back there. I will do the grind. I will
Yeah.
deal with the zombies.
Yeah. It's really interesting also, just like, there it's it's weird that it's happening right now, like the pandemic is happening right now, and we're releasing this game about Chinese restaurants when Chinese restaurants aren't doing so well.
Yeah.
So we are hoping to, sort of shine a light into like, the all the different issues that come along with not just, the 1920s, but also like our current
Now.
situation.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I think again, like it's a game development process that's so connected with paying attention to the feedback that you're getting, right? That it just naturally seems like it expands and incorporates that and pays attention to that and molds and changes for that. And I know it's a different phase once it's like out there in the
Yeah.
world and we can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But the process has been, from what I can tell, and from talking to you and from just seeing what you put out there, just so open to wanting to bring in all of those experiences and wanting to be thoughtful about it and then wanting to put it out there in such an authentic way.
Thank you.
I'd say with humility and passion. So.
Thank you.
So I've so enjoyed talking to you. Like this is like I said, I'm so excited for this game. Oh my gosh. Please y'all go to Kickstarter, help them get every stretch goal in the whole friggin' world because this game is so cool. Wait until you see what like the character sheets look like because they look like menus in Chinese. They're so cute. It's so cool. So go to the Kickstarter. Throw them some support. We're gonna hopefully play the game in October for our spooky month, because heck yeah, and just go there and even just reading the game would be a wonderful experience. And then getting together and playing. And if you can't find anybody to play with, jump on our Discord and we will make it happen. We'll get you in a group and we'll play that game together once it's released. So I would like to thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to make sure that you get to share that we didn't touch upon?
I would like to list off all of the people on this project if
Yes,
possible.
please.
There's a lot, and we've added more people after the Kickstarter launch.
Go for it. It's good. I want to hear.
Okay, cool. So we have, of course, Senfo Lim. He's the co-designer, and Brandon Atten and Matthew Orr. They're both the wet ink side of publishing. I'm with Game and Curry, and I'm also one of the designers. In terms of writers, we have Kiana Shaw, Ross Chen, and Daniel Kwan. They all wrote the Chinatowns, but Kiana's also writing something for us as a stretch goal, which is a scenario. Janaea Kemper worked on the social groups, so you'll see some of her work integrated in there as well. Ivan Wong is a consultant who did consulting for the translations, language, name stuff, all of that, and he also worked together with Jay Zhang, who also did a non-binary names table for us. So we have like a names table that you can choose from. Actually, we have 4 different names tables that you could choose from, but there's a lot of stuff in there.
We existed in the 1920s.
Yeah, exactly. James Mendez-Hodes was our sensitivity consultant. He helped us write a lot of this stuff and made my words less salty. Samantha Lai is one of my friends from middle school, and she came from a restaurant family, and so she did the consulting for like restaurant stuff, along with Erin Katana-Sayas, who is also working on a section on how to roleplay as a service industry worker. So that's like another section.
Yes.
Kristen Devine is writing a scenario for us, along with Sharon Biswas, Yoshi Krillman, Carl Pierre Lewis, and our 2 editors are Carol Darnell, Haley Birch, and our artists are Kwan Chai Moria, who did the cover, Noel Tian Nguyen, who did some art in the inside, Joanne St. Lauren, who also did some work on the inside, Stephen Wu, who did like a lot of the art in the core book and the cover for the scenario book, Sadia Bees, Robert Richburg, Jabari Weathers. They're all working on the Hmong cards. Amanda Call worked on one of the maps for the thing itself. Matthias Benici, who's doing like the graphic design and layout and everything. Mabel Harper, Jian Shim, Morgan Nuncio, and Vladimir Bredovich are all scenario writers and stretch goal writers. So I just want to make sure that we get
no, absolutely. And I mean, look at all of these people who are putting their love into this game and just how expansive it is and how much perspective you're bringing into what you're doing, just how creative. So no, thank you for reading that off. I think, yeah, no, I think the fact that you have all of that and that you have such love for them and that you're working together in such a wonderful, like, that's so characteristic of the spirit that I'm hearing from the game. Anyway.
So. Oh, and we have one more writer. Sorry. Yes. Elton Lau wrote a section on the introduction to Jiangshi in pop culture in general. So, yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yes. I want to read this book so bad. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm so excited to have done this. This is so great. We're gonna let everybody know as soon as we can play and stream one of these games. Fantastic. Jump over to the Kickstarter. I know it's somewhere in our chat and it'll be in our chat in their time. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Banana. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to do video despite having not been warned. My bad. And yeah, and I look forward to the Kickstarter being over and moving forward and learning the game. It'd be
Thank
great.
you so much for having me. This was super
Oh,
fun.
my pleasure. Okay, Adam, are you ready to take us out? Are you there? Adam, you're muted. Okay. Okay. All right, I think we're ready. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Much, much love. Yay.